All right, let's get started. Time being 12:28 p.m. April 13th, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order of Kane County's American Rescue Plan Committee. Clerk, please call the roll.
Bates,
Bates here.
Brown, Cross,
Raj here. Jeez.
Gums, Kenyon,
Here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Martin,
Martin present.
Molina,
Molina present.
Strothman,
Strathman present.
Tepe,
Debbie here.
and Sanchez.
Sanchez here. All right, we have quorum. Typically, people will say, I'm going to try to keep this meeting short, and it goes long, so I'm going to try and make this meeting last as long as possible. Let's do the reverse psychology, all right?
Slow down, sir. If we're not happy, we just go home and the meeting gets canceled.
Or just continue.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Tepe.
in order to make the meeting go long, just make certain you do not call on Mr. Kenyon.
No comment. All right. Actually, we need an approval of the minutes. Can someone just ask for unanimous consent to approve the minutes of March 30th, 2022?
Debbie asks request.
All right. Any opposed? All right. Public comments on agenda and non-agenda items. Do we have anyone online? I don't see any unfamiliar names and I don't see anyone in person. So I will assume we have none. We'll move on to discussion items. Program manager update, Mr. Phillips.
Hello, Peter Phillips, American Rescue Plan Program Manager.
Your mic on, Peter?
It is.
Oh, yeah,
Is that-
that might be one of the ones you got to get on top of.
All right. So Peter Phillips, American Rescue Plan Program Manager. A brief update. We have completed the distribution of the 40 competitive grant agreements that have been distributed to all the recipients. A good number of them have already executed their agreements and gotten them in, and but part of the process is involved a new application, systems application, the third party, the DocuSign. So some of our recipients needed some customer service, which we gladly provided to help them with the execution of their documents. So and that's ongoing. And then we also are completing the project form application within the SharePoint site, and there's a upcoming video, how-to video, and how that application will work and how you might find that beneficial. We'll provide a detailed video on that. And we're working on several other things. We have some good synergy going on. I think that everyone had received the memo that Jane had sent out on behalf of Madam Chair last night, which was a result of some real critical thinking and especially hard work by State's Attorney's Office. And I think that memo you will find after Mr. Sanchez's presentation today has a good synergy. And if you take some time after the presentation today to digest their memo over the weekend, I think that they coupled together well with today's presentation. But with that, I think I would bring to State's Attorney if they have something like to mention briefly on the memo that went out last night. I would turn it over to State's Attorney if that's necessary.
If you guys don't have anything to add, I will just say to committee members, as you read that document, if you have any questions or anything like that, send it to Steve Ford and to Vince Coyle, CC Peter and myself as well. Yeah, you just got it yesterday, not expecting you to have digested all 14 pages or however many it is. So, all right.
So that's the extent of my update.
Any questions for Mr. Phillips? Okay, we will move on. The benefit of having a committee that meets every 2 weeks is you can get things done in a more compressed timeline. The disadvantage is that sometimes you don't have all the time you would like to prepare. Sometimes things change. And that is the case today. So our discussion items, the next three, I'm going to kind of merge into one. I wasn't planning on having this sort of presentation for you today, but new information came to light in the past week, especially in the past 3 or 4 days, that have reorganized my thinking. And as I started to redo my presentation, it took on a life of its own. So I am actually going to be proposing to you today some options for a spending plan. That's what we're ultimately working towards. But again, new information came to light that changed my thinking. And so I'm going to walk through this with you today and just let me get through it. I know there's going to be questions and, probably hope some criticisms and we can go through it. Maybe this is just not the direction we want to go in, but based on everything I'm seeing so far, being as close as I am to all this, I think this could be a very good scenario for us to look at. So let me share my screen. Okay. Proposed spending plan for our committee. So let's start off with where we're at now financially. Ernst & Young is still putting finishing touches on the update to our financial worksheet that you all saw a few months ago, but there haven't really been many changes to that. So between Peter and myself, we have a pretty close estimate that I think will only be off by a few $1,000s of $78.9 million left after what has been spent and what has been spoken for. That number I came up with the other day, as of yesterday, we had an action taken at county board. You may recall $10.4 million was accepted for FY21 payroll reimbursement. So now that money, that $10.4 million is in the COVID savings fund, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. So our new number, working number that we have to figure out what to do with, $68.5 million.
Wow. So
in the spending plan, there's really only a few categories for us to determine. Now, this isn't the reporting. This isn't, we're not talking about all the 88 or however many spending categories that the Treasury recognizes. This is for our planning purposes. So can everybody see that well enough? I never know when it's on the screen. Government services and payroll reimbursement. Government services is another way of saying revenue recoupment, lost revenue. We've had many conversations about what are we going to do with this money, and the biggest concern has been our budget gap, knowing that it comes up every year, and we want to make sure that we're taken care of on our end so that we can do whatever we can to put more financial pressure on taxpayers. So when we talk about that category here for government services, that's another way of thinking budget gap uses, because the only way we can use money for potential budget gap uses is out of those two categories: government services, revenue recoupment, and payroll reimbursement. So that's that section there. Departmental requests, it's pretty self-explanatory. External expenditures / to be determined. This is where we get into maybe another community support grant round, other external requests that we've had, like Cossacane County has one that I've actually got some new information on I'll be sharing with you soon. And anything else we want to do. This is also the category, the external expenditures to be determined, where we can take our time. We've got 2 more years to figure out how we're going to spend it. There's no rush on this section of the spending plan. There's a lot of, I think, 20 new expenditure categories in the final rule that didn't exist in the interim final rule. I know Madam Chair has looked at some of those with interest, and other committee members have had the same. So this is a category where we can really start getting into some of these other potential uses and take our time, do our research, do homework, come up with pitches and proposals, whatever we'd like. And then administrative costs. So today I'll be proposing 2 options. And again, these are just proposals. This came about just in the last day, really. And so I'm not expecting everyone to just agree with this. I want you to be critical, but again, given as much thought as possible on the issue, coming up with 2 options. Let's look at administrative costs. And speaking with Peter, we determined $2 million. I really doubt that we'll go over $2 million in the life of this program for administrative expenses. In the worksheet, we already have $1.4 million that has been allocated, quote unquote. And that's the up to $1 million for Ernst & Young. And then the $0.4 million would be the salary for Mr. Phillips throughout the life of the program. So the recommendation here is that we bump it up another $600,000 to $2 million total for administrative costs. But the big question is government services and payroll reimbursement. How do we determine a number for that? And this is where things get a little more complicated, but in some ways a little more simple. These are numbers from Mr. Onzik. I had asked him recently for a conversation, trying to get him to give me a number. Just give me a number, Joe, napkin math number of how much we should allocate or earmark for potential budget uses. And he couldn't do it. So we talked on the phone. We had a nice long conversation. I understood more than I could repeat back to you. It's like when you're starting to learn a new language, but it made sense of why he couldn't give me a firm number that he was comfortable with, knowing all these what ifs. But through our conversation, it sparked some ideas and I had some realizations. So here you see his new numbers that he gave us last week, I believe, at executive committee. He updated his projections. These are the old ones from last July, I believe. Now we have here 2021 lost revenue near final. That's pretty much the number that's going to be coming in this year for revenue recoupment. A big difference from that $16.6 million that we were thinking we might have before. Huge difference. And as we all know, a big increase in revenues that wasn't expected. Why we even have any money in revenue recoupment for 2021 is not tax revenue loss. It's an investment loss, investment revenue loss. So had that not occurred, it would be a big fat zero for 2021 revenue recoupment, which is, again, one of the only categories we can use for budgetary purposes going forward, government services. Now he updated his numbers. They're a little more realistic, it seems. Instead of 17.1 million, there's 7.7 for 2022, and it goes on. But what this demonstrates to me and what it highlights is that these numbers themselves they're risky. They're very fluid. And if we want to build a firm foundation on them, that is very risky. It is a gamble. I'm not much of a gambler myself. But to me, assuming that these monies will all be there when we need them, it comes with a great deal of risk, but we still have to figure out some number, right? So let's look at the other section of this, the payroll reimbursement. So we just approved the 10.4 million yesterday. So that's already in the bank, so to speak. That's in our COVID savings fund. The number here for 2022, assuming we're going to be the formula will remain the same for payroll reimbursement for 2022. That's a pretty accurate number given like 2% wage increases across the board. Now we're working on FEMA, Peter and the team, we're working on the FEMA reimbursements we've talked about. FEMA has come out recently and said that their program is going to end on July 1st as far as eligible expenses are concerned. So any eligible expenses for FEMA up to July 1st will be reimbursed. After July 1st, nothing. Right? Any costs incurred after July 1st will not be eligible for reimbursement. So they're the emergency management agency of our entire country. And so they're kind of the canary in the coal mine. And they're already saying the emergency is waning down. We don't need to keep reimbursing you for this anymore. I'm suspecting that the Treasury is going to follow suit possibly by the end of this year and turn around and let us know, because of the nature of the emergency now, it's not a pandemic, or maybe it's just an epidemic or whatever. Payroll reimbursement will not be an option going forward. And that is my best guess, but knowing how it's already gone, what we are reimbursing for payroll right now is not full amounts like with CARES Act. It started off 100% of health and public safety was reimbursed. And now I think it's somewhere around 50%. And it has to be staff that is dedicated to dealing with COVID only. And there's a way of determining that. So as we go forward, once the state emergency declaration lifts and whatever federal declarations there are, I don't see how there will be any justification for COVID related payroll reimbursement. So my prediction is that possibly by the end of this year, they're going to turn around and tell us this is the last year. And maybe even for this 2022 year, they may even change the formula and say even less is recoupable, but maybe not. Again, a lot of uncertainties. I do think it's a pretty safe bet to say we're not going to be able to collect that money in 2024. So I just wanted to go on this little segue to have this information in your head to understand why we have to be careful with the number that we come up with for government services and payroll reimbursement. So let's go back to this chart. The two options based on this information. One of the ideas that came about when I was talking to Joe, it was actually something I had already thought of, and then he said it. So to me, it was a bit of a validation. That $10.4 million that we just accepted yesterday for payroll reimbursement, he suggests we leave that in the COVID savings fund. We earmark it for these purposes, for government services. It has no strings attached to it. So we would need to, as an act of resolution by the county board, say that money is going to stay there until we need it for X and Y. So that was his suggestion, and I happen to agree. So here's a couple ways we could slice this. We have that $10.4 million. If we add 9.6, it'll total $20 million earmarked for government services and payroll reimbursement, or $25 million. I wanted to look at two different numbers to see how it would affect the other numbers underneath it in various categories.
I'm sorry, I'm following your math. Where are you getting the 9.6 from?
This is just to fill it in to make it equal 20.
But where's the 9.6 coming from?
Oh, from the ARP fund itself. So what's in parentheses has already been taken out. That's the payroll reimbursement that we approved at county board yesterday. And this other number is what I'm recommending as an option to add to that earmark. So it would stay in the ARP fund if you want to get into like the bookkeeping of it. It would just stay in the ARP fund, but as we develop our plan, it would be earmarked. That amount of money is what we have to tap into to add to the $10.4 million for government service and payroll reimbursement uses, AKA budget gap filling. So equaling either 20 or $25 million. Let me get through the presentation. I'm sure you guys have a lot of ideas and you might not like those numbers. Some of you might like them, but when I get to the end of this, then we'll open it up and you guys can sling the arrows into what may come. Okay, so the next section, departmental request. And I should say, the reason why I did these amounts is because they seemed safe. They seemed like safe bets, knowing we don't know how much we're going to be able to reimburse. Okay, so that's why I went with these totals. Next section is department requests. We went through process. We whittled a big list down to $49 million. I reached out recently to the department heads and the elected officials, and I asked them, do you have any projects on this list? It's been a few months. Any projects that can be scrubbed from the list, either because you've got money elsewhere for it, it's a moot point, or for whatever other reason. Are there any you can remove from the list? Are there any projects that you're requesting that have updated numbers? Have the costs gone up? Have the costs gone down? And then knowing that we're probably going to try and stuff, all of our requests into a smaller amount than the $49 million, I asked them to prioritize in order for the department of importance. And then also which ones are needs for the department and which ones are just wants. Because as we get into a decision-making process, we're going to want to know that what's a priority for them and which ones do they need, which ones do they just want. So I asked everyone to provide me with those updates to their projects. And I think the last one in yesterday. And the new number, the new total number is now $41.2 million for department requests. So there are things that were scrubbed from the lists. I think Mark Van Kerkhoff and his team, they've been working on securing grants for some of their requests and have gotten some of those monies. And I know Madam Chair has been involved with that. And I believe Mr. Ford as well from the Jobs Committee. So $41.2 million is the new number. I've always thought maybe $30 million would be a good starting point for department requests. Given all the information that's come in and the thinking that I've had about it, this is not something I ever expected I would do. I'm recommending that we fund the full amount, that we go full funding on the department requests as they are now. It's been some time, and by just not waiting on purpose, but by virtue of the fact that we have taken this long to get to department requests, $9 million or so has been reduced. So that was a good exercise that we all went through. And then now we're seeing even more fruits come from that labor. So given that, I'm recommending full funding of the department requests. That leaves some left for, again, these external expenditures. Now with the department requests, people from the outside, I know you guys know this, but people looking in from the outside might think, oh, that's $41.2 million so that, the clerk's office can get a new limo and everyone's going to get new office furniture and raises and stipends. And that's not the case. That's literally not the case at all. All those department requests that came in were really good. They were, if not needs, very good wants, but many of them were needs. And we went through and vetted them all and recommended up to $49 million. And I would say at least half of that amount are projects that are going out into the community. that aren't even going to the departments themselves. And I think it's very important for everyone to know that. Like, for instance, Mark Van Kerkhoff in the Development Department, 5 requests totaling, I think, $8 or $9 million. Not a single dollar is directed to his department. It is all going out into the community for economic development and recovery. As an example, the Health Department, there's a $10 million request to help establish better infrastructure for mental health services in the county because we don't have a countywide 708 board like McHenry does. So when we talk about $41.2 million for department requests, it's not really going much to the departments as much as it is out into the community directly. And any benefit that it does give to the departments is also an indirect benefit to the people of Kane County. Long-winded way of saying external expenditures is what we'll spend on anything else. So what's left over, either of these scenarios, I think is a pretty healthy sum, especially considering that half at least of the department requests are going out into the public. So these are the two scenarios. These are the two options that I'm proposing that we consider. If you guys don't like it, I won't have my feelings hurt. This just came about, like I said, in the past day or two, but I feel good about this as a way of allocating these monies that's safe, that minimizes our risk, and gives us a lot of room for maximum output and maximum effect in the community. So that's it. I think I covered everything. That went a lot more quickly than when I practiced it by myself. So hopefully I'll take Mr. Martin and then Mr. Frost.
I just want to make sure I understand the government service payroll reimbursement component.
Yeah.
And I apologize for being so slow sometimes on the uptake for
Okay.
finances. Why do you cap us again at the 9.6 or the 14.6 ability to recoup?
Just to bring the total to either 20 or 25 million. That was the thinking. Since we already have $10.4 million that we know is in a fund, the rest of those potential monies on ONSIC's projection, it's shaky ground. We could turn around and say, yeah, there's going to be $21 million more coming in for 2022 and 2023. But as we saw with this year, if the revenues stay up next year the way they have been this past year, we're not going to see anywhere near those amounts. So knowing we had the 10.4 already, okay, what can we bring that number up to? And 20 and 25 is, to me, seem like sufficient numbers to cover whatever budgetary purposes we would have. Frost and then Madam Chair.
Thanks. And actually, thanks for doing this. When you're on a lot of committees like we all are, you just don't have time to pour over numbers and to see it.
No, you do. You just can't sleep.
Simple and black and white.
Nice big numbers.
Yeah, just what you want to see when you come to a meeting. So my thoughts are, just starting from the top, I would prefer on the first line, the 20 million. Going to the second line, the 41.2 departmental requests. I was always in the camp of funding everything that we could. However, I do know that there are some of those things that would fall under wants and not needs. So let me just go down the list. I guess I'm a little uncomfortable with just sweeping everything that's left into something that's called external expenditures. I'd rather have it be more broad. We just sat through a marathon admin meeting where at least 3 times, and we heard from the chief judge, the building situation came up. And if we could, it's my understanding, and I would ask that Mr. Phillips maybe look into this and report back at our next meeting, but it's my understanding that other counties are using some of this money for capital projects. And I would like to have some flexibility on, say if we took the 41.2 and knocked it down to the high 30s, and then say we had $20 million in that third column, but I'd like to expand the definition of that third column to, other projects or something along those lines.
I only put external expenditures, just so you know, just to give people an idea of some of the stuff that could be used with that money, but the to be determined is really the appropriate term.
And I was one of the people, along with Mavis, asking that we could take another look at what we weren't able to fund on the social things. But I would like to know as a board member, are other counties using this for capital funds? And if so, could we put something in our piggy bank for building projects?
Well, we can't necessarily put something in our piggy bank. Everything has to be allocated by the end of 2024, spent by the end of 2026.
That could be allocated for engineering, architecture, things like
Yeah,
that.
and already in the departmental request for building management, there's $7 million for capital stuff. And Roger's here and he could, list off some of the viable uses, and it's in the information he sent along, which I'm also going to be spreading out to you guys. I just got it all in yesterday. So just something to keep in mind. There's already $7 million in there for
Right.
capital.
I mean, if there
specifically.
was if there ended up being, and I'm just throwing this out, but if there ended up being $5 or $10 million, that's a big start on those projects. So, and again, we just heard, every single thing we talked about, it seemed like it had to do with space needs and
Yeah.
things like that. So.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, I was waving my hand. Thank you. When it came to capital, in the letter that you received yesterday, on page 6.
Can you get the mic on you
Oh,
a little more?
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry.
Some of
Yes.
these are
On
not
on
sensitive.
page 6 of the letter that was sent to you yesterday, it clearly delineates what can be spent for capital. So I know you just got it late yesterday afternoon, and perhaps Mr. Ford or Mr. Coyle can drill down that quickly since they drafted the letter. Could you?
Can you give a brief summary on the capital component?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Sanchez, Stephen Ford from the State's Attorney's Office. There is a reference to infrastructure expenses under the provision of government services, part of the letter. The final rule also does reference possible capital expenditures, I believe under the first category, responding to the public health emergency or its negative economic impacts. I think to give you an appropriate analysis, it may be, you may wish to, send our office a specific question. We can provide a detailed analysis because the Treasury Department does provide flexibility, but in doing so, for certain projects that aren't specifically referenced in its rule, they provide guidance as to how that analysis should be done. So we will be happy to do that. If you have a specific question, we can take a look at it, do some research and respond either in writing or at a future meeting.
Yeah, I would just ask then that chairman of the committee send that request for that information, and also if staff could, look and see what, I know something came through recently about one of the adjacent counties spending this money on capital projects. But if we could research that, maybe talk about it at our next meeting.
Absolutely. And I think that's also a good point too. There's only certain ways that you can spend this money for capital. So that's another kind of a strategic maneuvering that we'd have to consider if it has to come from government services. And that reduces the amount that could be used for some of the other government services we want to fund. But yeah, we'll get some more answers on that. And,
Thank you.
Mr. Tepe had his hand raised, and then Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Conceptually, I understand what you're trying to accomplish, but I want to make certain that we're not putting, to some degree, the cart before the horse. You're not suggesting that we are limiting department requests to 41.2 million, are you?
No, what I'm saying is that the department heads and elected officials themselves reported back to me, and based on the updates they gave, the new number, the total amount of department requests is 41.2 million.
What was the old number?
The old number was 49.
Okay, so
49
it did
million.
come down. So
Yeah.
that may not be.
Okay,
tenable
and
anymore.
then you're saying that the external expenditures is then what is left. So you in doing that, you have eliminated any trying to think of the right word, but any reserve for future revenue loss.
No, that would be the first category for revenue loss.
So
That's that government
that's where
services.
that 20 or 25 million is.
Yes. Yeah, government services is synonymous with revenue recoupment and lost revenue.
Okay, thank you. Now I understand.
And then Mr. Martin and Mr. Leonard.
My thought and concept is that every nickel that's distributed to the county and properly expended or accounted for goes to the direct benefit of all of our taxpayers. And I therefore want to, with whatever the consensus ends up being or the vote on the board, I want to maximize honestly what comes to the county. I understand the external distributions but if we make value judgments on which of those go or who's going to get the money or what type does, some facet of the taxpayers or the residents will benefit, some won't. Every nickel that comes into the county that is properly expended goes to the benefit of the county as a whole. And whatever we need to do to maximize that activity, and I appreciate and I agree with your point, all of these departmental requests, nobody's buying cars, nobody's doing anything crazy. These are all things that, as I think you said, over half go to the direct benefit. And the other fact is the half that you can't say replaces this piece of machinery for somebody is still going to the benefit of a taxpayer because it goes in support of the county. So I think we need to determine how we address how we best serve the county. And in my opinion is we have control over what runs through the county's coffers, and what we distribute otherwise may or may not be good depending upon how it's administered. So I want to maximize what we bring into the county.
So that section, external expenditures, I again put that there just to give an idea of what that money could be. You could also think of that as sort of a buffer, money that's just waiting to be allocated when it comes to the government services, revenue, reimbursement, recoupment. If we find out, hey, next year our revenues are way down and we can collect more for revenue loss than we thought, we can draw some of that extra money from that to be determined row. So that's another way of thinking that is it's just kind of like a buffer. And if we need it, if we end up spending more than $25 million, say, for government services, then we can draw it from that other section.
If I could just complete a point.
Uh-huh.
The other thing that I think is, I'm going to use a negative word, but rampant in the world today is that the whole world is fat and happy because of its COVID relief. And that money is going to be gone when it's gone. There's nothing coming behind it except the obligation to repay the national debt that is accrued because it's being paid. And to some degree, we're paying for some of that money's gone now because of our inflation rate, which you can argue percentage terms or whatever, but the distribution of funds has applied to that. So I don't hold our future to be that bright because I don't think it's going to come from the state of Illinois in a couple of years, and I don't think it's going to come from the federal government. And I think we need to recognize that this pot is here and it's going to be gone.
Yeah. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank you for doing this. And under administrative costs, I totally agree with that. I think that's wonderful. I would suggest that we may look at a few changes in this. And the first one being government services and payroll reimbursement. I think what I would like to do is suggest that we increase that to 30 million or 35 million. The departmental request, I think what we need to do there is put up to as a qualifier on that money and maybe reduce that to 35 million, because as you suggested, They have cut back on some of the wants that they had, but they still have some wants there. And I think, we might be able to get that down a little bit more. And then in the third category, the external expenditures to be determined, I think that should just be stricken and put to be determined reserves. Who knows where it's going to go? But to even suggest that we're looking at external expenditures with the different considerations that are going on throughout the county, I think that doesn't serve us well at all. If we're looking at potentially asking the voters to consider a sales tax increase, and we've got a category there stating external expenditures 17 million. If I am a taxpayer, which I am, I'd say, well, if you're giving 17 million away, you don't need money from me. So I think we would just be better if we use a more general term like to be determined reserves and then put that amount in there, whatever that may be. But I think the idea, the concept is good. And once again, as you stated earlier, we don't have to make any decisions on this today or tomorrow or next week. And in fact, the allocations don't even have to be applied until 2024 and spent by 2026. So we do have time, and to rush into something, considering all the other factors that we have going on in the county and the potential for a tax increase to our constituents, I think we might be better served if we lay low a little bit and don't give the impression that we're looking at giving money out because we don't need it.
Well, I definitely regret putting external expenditures on there now because it's a sticking point. To be determined. That's what I'll relabel that one. Ms. Bates.
Mr. Chairman, I am very glad that you put external expenditures on your chart. Don't apologize, please. As you all know, I have been fighting to make more external expenditures from this money. I believe the R in ARPA stands for rescue, and I believe that the economy may be doing very well right now, but not everybody. All ships are not rising in this tide, and we see a lot of vulnerable people still in need of this ARPA money to help them out. I was talking to Michelle Myers. We were both at the Kiwanis River Cleanup Day. She is the executive director of Mutual Ground, and they have now absorbed Breaking Free, which is a drug treatment program. And she told me, and she was one of the big six, so they got the 333, the $333,000 check. She said this money has immediately and gone straight into helping so Mutual Ground is the battered women's shelter. And this money has gone directly already into helping these women who are at Mutual Ground. There was no middleman. There was no Kane County Department doing this. They're using it for retention. They're using it for hiring to help these women and to help get these people off of drugs. This money went straight into the purpose that the American Rescue Plan was for. So I do not want to see this money. I do not want to see external expenditures taken out of this chart. I think it's very appropriate for the American Rescue Plan money to be put into rescuing these most vulnerable people in our community. And if you want me to say that all over again, I will, but I'm done for now. Thank you.
Mr. Frost.
So Mavis, as I said earlier, I'm with you. And
I know you are.
always have been.
Yep.
But, we spent about 4 million on that. And I, if we spent another 2, that would be great. But what Mr. Leonard's saying is to be determined encompasses that as well as other options. So we're just asking that it's, the way it's written up there now, that whole amount would go to external expenditures. If we leave it at to be determined, it would be, it could go to external expenditures, a second round, as well as other things. And I'll just end by saying to Mr. Martin's point about lasting benefit to the taxpayers of Kane County, I can think of nothing more than at least starting to fill a bucket that would lead to a building that would last a century. So thank you.
Mr. Martin.
I always advise clients if they had issue that had any complexity to it, that you can't attempt to resolve multiple unknowns. So you need to pick something and satisfy that. And if you whittle away over a period of time, you will end up solving the problem. If we commit, if we try to resolve, because these are all, except for departmental requests, and really they're, to a degree, they're unknown. I mean, we've got them down to 31, 41. They may be less. We may end up having some new thing that shows up that means that 41 goes to 45. I don't know, but we're trying to resolve a multitude of unknowns. And if we plug a figure and say, we're going to give 17.1 million or 12 million or anything, and it's going to be for external, I think that we're creating false science. And I understand Mavis's motivation. I do like to recognize the fact, though, that we have up there, if you exclude administrative costs, we have 3 unknowns. And I don't want to try to address 3 unknowns with 3 arbitrary numbers. I find that to be difficult. If we leave the external expenditure to be determined, this board can address the issue down the road without feeling that it's breaching its fiduciary obligation to properly spend the money.
We're editing this in real time.
I know. I love it.
I think that explains a little more what I was going after.
Yeah.
Because really the external expenditure is just one concept, one possibility of what to do with the rest of that money. And that's why I call that more of a buffer. Because we might want to put more into government services. We might be able to put more into government services. With the department requests, I do disagree that that is an unknown. We do know right now it's $41.2 million. We're not accepting any new requests from the departments and offices. So if anything, that number would go down from there, but it wouldn't go up. So that is the one, and administrative costs as well. Those ones I think are very solid. But I definitely see your point, and that's kind of behind this concept that I put together is we got to start putting some markings in the sand to give us a sense of where we're at. And that's why the government services, that's just sort of a way of an arbitrary, but trying to use the best estimates that we have to arbitrarily but informedly put that number there. And then with that to be determined, the newly titled to be determined, that can go in any direction. It can go to government services if we have enough that we can recoup, or it can go anywhere else that is eligible. Mr. Leonard, were you?
No,
ready?
I was just great.
Oh, it's like an auction. If you move, you're getting called on. I got good peripheral vision. Mr. Berman.
Yes, I like the idea to be determined. One of the things I think is a lot of the population is wondering, what are we doing with these funds? And to my knowledge, this is the first time we've really come up with segregated. And I think they're going to see this and they're going to feel that we're moving forward. We're coming up with things that we've shown them nothing really over the period of time. So this, I think, is good. And I don't care what the numbers are. I think as long as we have some numbers, that to me is the important thing.
Yeah, and I think that's somewhat of not a counterbalance, but to what Mr. Leonard said, we've got some time. We don't have to rush into this. I don't think this is rushing into this because we've been building up to this for a while. And to your point, the public does want to know what we're doing with it. I want to know what we're doing with it, because until we know, this committee really doesn't have much work to do. Madam Chair.
Once again, I'm going to review that letter that was sent out. and
What
this
time
is,
was that sent, ma'am?
Afternoon.
Late afternoon.
I'm trying to find it. in
Look,
my
it's from
email.
Jane Talich.
From Jane, okay. Thank
It
you.
was around maybe 3:30.
Yeah.
From Jamie Mosser?
I believe it was 3:38.
Talich, Jane.
Jamie Mosser?
No,
No,
Jane.
Jane.
Oh, it is from, yes, you're correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
Sounds
On,
Jane sent it.
on page 8, they were kind enough to highlight things for me, is a description of the final rule for lost revenue. And it's pretty finite, and I would like, maybe we could have one of our state's attorneys just kind of go through it very quickly. They did provide a chart, which I don't have with me on that funding model. I believe that because of the economy increasing, that our revenue loss is going to be less and less, that the numbers, I'm just suggesting that what we're seeing in 22 is going to be replicated in 23, 24.
Absolutely.
So there'll be less revenue recoupment because we'll have a less lost revenue. Certainly property tax, we know historically, even in the height of the recession, what did we have? 1% down? It was modest. It was
Minimal.
1 to 2% down. It was incredibly modest. And that we can use that as lost revenue. Sales tax is incredibly high right now. That's how we, because people are buying things now. They're buying things online. Kane County is getting that tax revenue for purchases online as well. As long as you reside in Kane County and have it delivered in Kane County gets the tax revenue for it. So I have to be very cautious. I'm being conservative of how much estimated money and lost revenue we're going to be having in 23, 24.
Madam Chair, I think that's also kind of the spirit of where I'm coming from with this, is trying to be conservative, knowing if we have another year like we did this past year, we're not going to have even $20 million to allocate for government
revenue
services. Oops.
So I would support what you're saying, Mr. Leonard, and moving it up higher, the amount higher, but I'm hesitant to do so because I'm not sure if we're walking in shifting sands.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chairman, I think your points are well taken, and I agree. I do think revenues are going to continue to increase, so we're not going to have the lost revenues we had projected in the past. So I understand your point there, but with respect to the actual taxes that we bring in towards our general fund, those are the state income tax. They're the local tax or the property tax. There's about 5 or 6 categories, the RTA tax. Those, if you take a look over the last 10 years, and I don't have this confirmed yet, I've actually got an email into Mr. Onzik on it. I don't think the actual revenue for our general fund has gone down minimally over the 10 years in any one year. And overall, it's gone up quite a bit. So I don't see that the revenues are going to go down. I don't see where people are going to quit buying things. I don't see where people are not going to pay their property taxes. I think our revenue base is solid, and we predicted it would go down because of the pandemic, and it really hasn't. So I totally agree with you on that point. The question that I have and the concern I have, and I don't know if anyone here can answer it, but Peter Phillips was nice enough to set up a schedule for me to talk to Ernst & Young. I want to find out with respect to the payroll reimbursement specifically, if we raise salaries for our employees, which they are in need of that, and instead of having a payroll budget with IMRF and FICA of, say, 74 million, if we increase that and give them increases, not only their normal increases, but in some areas, other areas, additional money to get them more competitive with surrounding counties, can we use reimbursement under payroll reimbursement under the ARPA plan for that?
And if I may, perhaps, but again, I'm going to proceed with caution on that because as we short-term raise the compensation, the cost for compensation, once this money is gone, then what? How are we going to fill in that gap?
Well, we're going to have to look at that. I mean, right now, that is not the problem. The problem is probably 2 to 3 years away. And I agree with you. We have to look at that point. But the other thing we have to realize too, is in the 21 budget, the revenue exceeded our predictions by about $11 million. That $11 million isn't going to go away next year, but it's not in our 22 budget. So we're going to have additional revenues again in 22 and 23. That amount of monies will continue to move forward. That's going to help with part of our gap and our deficit. But then we will have to look at other things. But with having the ARPA money and some COVID money left, I think very easily we can handle any gap we have over the next few years without having to have either a property tax or sales tax increase right now. I'm not saying down the road, we may not need that. I'm sure we will. But right now, with receiving $196 million over the last couple of years, and then going to the public and saying, you know, that's not enough. We need a tax increase. I just don't think that's going to flow well.
All right, and I think we ought to take that $196 million and put that aside because we're looking at how it's being spent. Not all of it is going directly to the county. When we got the CARES Act money, most of that went out. Business grants, subsidies, whatever.
Municipalities.
Municipalities, it went out the door. And that's what it was designed to do. So we can't say that that is Kane County's money. That money was for us to distribute, and which it was done very well, exceptionally well. So we can't, I hate to put it all in one jar and saying, look at, this is all the money you have, when that's not the truth. I mean, it's not really.
Well, it was our option. I mean, we did decide to do it the way we did on the COVID money, but I think we still have 20 million left in COVID money.
10, the 20 is because of the payroll reimbursement that just got put in there.
Okay,
That-
yeah.
that
So,
brings it to 20.
so in essence, you know, we have 20 million there.
If 20
We have
million.
68 million in our, you know, that's still a lot of money.
Oh,
$88 million.
You and I are, we're tracking, but we don't know what the payroll is going to be with your new union contracts coming through. And we have to wait, just be patient, all right, till we get the information for the Safety Act, because I've asked Jamie Mosser and Judge Hall and the sheriff to put together those numbers for us. And those should be available, I'm hoping by the end of this month.
That would be great. You know, Madam Chair, the point that I'm making here is I'd like to find out through Ernst & Young specifically, if we have increases, whether they be mandate or Safety Act mandates or whatever they may be, or just giving increases to get our employees up to a competitive level with other counties. Can we use that additional payroll expense with ARP money? And that's, until I get that answer, I guess we're kind of
Talking.
waiting. Yes.
Yeah, I think we have a meeting set up or is going to be set up for you. To give you just a little peek at the answer, if it's an expense that we've incurred for payroll, it's eligible via the COVID guidelines, then yeah, we can take it as payroll reimbursement.
Yeah.
If
And I
it's
just,
planning ahead, we can't plan ahead with the payroll reimbursement because it's an after the fact calculation.
but we do have reserves that we can use after we experience those additional costs. So, yeah, we just need to find out. And I think once we get a definitive answer from Ernst & Young, we'll have a better idea where we're at on this.
Yeah, yeah. And you've expressed some of your ideas that go beyond this committee, more into finance, and the majority of finance committee is on this committee, so it is helpful. I think what I'm talking about today and what you were discussing, I think it meshes fairly well. So you and I should follow up soon.
Thank you.
Mr. Martin.
Well, I want to thank you for doing this. It's always good to have something to be critical of. Well, Dale made the point. We haven't had anything to talk about. And I think this methodology makes a lot of sense. I think it gives everybody in the room and the board kind of a sense of what our moving targets are, at least, and how we move forward, and what realistic numbers we can be negotiating among ourselves with. So I want to thank you. I think this makes a lot of sense. I think it moves us forward. And just today, we've had, I think, more sensible questions from the group than normal, because we have something to look at that gives us a basis for asking those questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Ms. Bates.
So looking at the government.
Oh, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. Mr. Tepe, I recall I saw your hand raised. Did you still have a question or comment?
No, I lowered it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So as we look at the government services payroll reimbursement in the amounts of 20 million and 25 million, this was based on advice from Mr. Onzik, correct? That these are amounts that he feels are ballpark for our budget gaps that
Are
we
not,
may.
no, these are as a result of my conversation with Mr. Onzik and then the updated projections that he gave
Mhm.
and then processing that through this and then That's where the number, so I haven't brought this back to
Sanchez
Joe.
computer?
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
Joe's
but-
got enough going on, especially with other ARP stuff. I wasn't gonna,
But this was based on your calculations, based on Mr. Onzic's projection of what, so this is an unknown, this is a suggestion, but this should be, in my mind, a pretty good, it's not a guess, it's an estimation. There was calculation that went into this, that this should be really a very abundant amount for us to put into the future budget gaps. So I think this is, I think that top line is good. The departmental requests, we went back and forth with the departments many times, 5, something, 2, 3, 4 times. So I think that's a good number. The 17, I see that's been edited, but TBD can include a lot of things. I think this is great. So thank you for doing this. And, you know, if Mr. Leonard thinks 30 or 35 million might be a number, we can discuss.
well, and
We
so
can
the,
discuss further.
and so that would be a conversation we would have potentially at the next meeting. So for this, the next, we are a recommendation body. It's good to always remember that. We come up with some great ideas and then we pass it off to the county board with hope, like, please accept our suggestions. So the next step really is for us to put one of these options into a resolution format, bring it to the next meeting if we're ready at that point, and then have the conversation. Do we want to amend the figures in some way? Go around and have that conversation and vote on any potential changes. But using one of these options as a starting point to just get the resolution put together, get something for us to beat up and then send on to the county board.
Are you asking for motion today?
I'm not asking for motion today. We don't have anything we can vote upon.
right.
But unless there's an objection, I'm suggesting that we will put into a resolution form this spending plan with option B with the 25 million total. Is there objections to that? This is the time now. Madam Chair, and then Mr. Berman, and then Mr. Frost.
I'm certainly not opposed to an additional 5 million increase on that at all. That's a modest increase, but before we go ahead and do that, I would like to wait until we have more defined information, perhaps an explanation from your conversation with Ernst & Young, and then additional information from our attorneys, because that's what I wanted to have is what can we spend it on? What can we get back from? Just give me a defined list.
Definitive, yes.
Give me a formula.
That's what,
Yeah, and I suppose I just have the benefit of being the chair and I'm, down in this. So I not in a specific forensic way, I have those answers in my head that you're seeking. So I can't wait for you to get those in a definitive, specific list. But it's the mechanism of how to use this money that I think I grasp pretty well. So that being said, I think we can do both. We can wait for that guidance. We can get that guidance and that input, have a resolution put together. If we're ready to discuss it at our next meeting, we will. If we're not, then we won't have a meeting. We don't have any reason to meet and we'll pick it up on the next one. But we may get those definitive answers in the meantime, in the next 2 weeks, to everyone's liking that is sufficient for us to have the conversation. So unless the committee has any disagreement with that, I will ask the state's attorney and Mr. Phillips to begin drafting the resolution and obtaining the information from Ernst & Young that we seek. Mr. Berman and then Mr. Kenyon.
my comment was pretty much what Madam Chair. It seems like we're working with a moving target every time we sit down and we don't have the answers to what the questions that we ask and we're waiting for to get those answers. So it's frustrating and it's got to be frustrating you and it's got to be frustrating for the entire committee. But those answers are the most important things that we have.
Well, those moving targets are only moving until we shoot them. So I'm going to say, Mr. Kenyon.
If you chose B, I would hope that we could use the extra money on government services that could go somewhere else. We have the total dollars, well, an extra $4 million that could go to the department request or to the community services.
To be determined.
Yeah, so then this, I think, provides.
We're
some-
not set in
it's-
stone.
No, it provides flexibility and accounting for all of these
I wanted to
unknowns.
make Mavis smile.
You did. I get a little wing too.
Oh, there you go.
I would like to be at the
Dates,
Ernst
sorry.
and Young meeting.
That is fine as long as it's only you and Leonard.
Yeah.
Who-
already ran into
who's-
this.
Whose company? Three's a crowd.
Yeah.
That's my,
Open meetings.
okay.
Because I
well,
don't know what other committees you guys are on.
All right, if that's not possible,
don't
then
need to
I
be there.
think it should be an open meeting.
She's not on finance. so it'd be-
No, I'm not.
I think it would be more cumbersome to make it an open meeting
Possibly.
and just more streamlined to set up the meeting as soon as possible. Have it annotated and Jenny she takes part of all of our team calls within, I would say like half hour. She spits back, here's the follow-up. I mean,
All right, well.
I'm not
it's
I'm not giving
go.
you that. You gotta
Okay.
have it a half hour after the meeting, but very quickly after the meeting, we can have a memo drafted that can be sent to everyone.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Could we,
Madam Chair.
as a way to facilitating potential board members' interest in the committee members, could we set up a meeting with Ernst and Young in person for maybe an hour and a half? And it would be a schedule so that board members could go in 2 at a time and just speak to them and take notes, have a one-on-one. They have time. You have to be timed. The next group would come in, and that way, that opportunity for everybody to have fully respond to them back and forth.
Mr. Chair,
We'll look into that. Mhm.
I
Ms.
think
Leonard?
it's a good idea. What if we had our next ARP meeting with Ernst and Young here to answer these
Exactly.
questions?
That's
Yes.
open meeting then.
Yeah, then it's open meeting and we're fine.
Let it be open. We're not hiding anything here, so.
I'm sorry.
I said,
me
let it
suggest-
be open.
We
Yeah.
have our own time, not following another meeting.
Yes.
We abuse these people, make them sit
Oh,
out in
yeah.
the hallway, but we don't want to do that to Ernst and Young too.
I would agree. I would agree.
Quit stuffing us in one envelope. Give us a separate.
In charge for them sitting here.
Let's see.
I would agree.
When's our next ARP meeting? The
2
27th?
weeks, yeah. 27. Yeah.
That's after Kane County Board Finance and Budget.
Mr.
That could
Berman, you
possibly
drive.
Not
that
the
way?
same day, though.
9 o'clock.
We gotta have our own time slots, so we're not standing around waiting.
So what do you guys think of having a special meeting then for this?
How about the regularly scheduled one in
Oh,
2
we
weeks?
don't get any.
Well,
extra
like
for it.
some were saying maybe not following committee meetings because
Well,
it'd
there's
be
just a
following
finance
finance.
meeting and that shouldn't take,
Yeah.
Mr. Berman's the
Oh,
chairman.
boy.
That won't take over an hour and
Berman was
15 minutes.
Billy,
Let's-
Billy.
Let's make it
never
at
say that.
10:30 or 11.
Okay.
Watch.
Let's leave it.
I will.
Okay, so
Never go long.
let me just putting some ideas out there.
Put it
If
in
I think once we have this conversation with Ernst and Young, I think we'll be in a position to move on the spending plan, however we may choose to amend it. And if, with your blessing, if we do a special meeting after a regularly scheduled one, but before executive committee, we could have this spending plan proposal to the county board by the next county board meeting.
Is the opposite one.
Hopeful. I'm always hopeful.
Yes.
But is that something that this committee would be willing to do in order to get it to the county board? If not, we have to wait a whole other month, but it's so close. We have that possibility and I love that idea that we can wrap this up in April, not wrap it up, but have this before. Mr. Phillips?
I would just suggest that we keep in mind regarding Ernst and Young that they do have people in multiple parts of the country. And if we were to coordinate this, we need a number of, for in person, we would need to give them more than a couple of weeks notice, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, obviously to expedite it, but
I assume we may have to have some Zoom attendance for that meeting.
Gonna say, if they
That's
can
fine.
zoom it, we're-
They can zoom in.
Zoom, we have the capability. So is that an idea that is interesting to the committee to have this, our next regularly scheduled meeting, bring Ernst and Young in, have the conversation, get everyone's questions answered, give you some time to think about it, come back the next week, say on like a Tuesday or something. It's a special meeting to just vote and discuss on the spending plan.
Yeah.
Send it to executive, send it to county board. All right.
I didn't write that down fast enough.
You don't have to write it down. I'll send it out.
This will be at the meeting
Jenny's
with
got it.
Ernst
Don't worry.
and then a few days
27th.
after that,
Okay.
we're gonna have-
All right. Well, unless there are any other comments, questions or concerns?
Let's wrap it up.
I need a motion to adjourn from
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Kenyon,
Seconded by
second by
Leonard.
Mr. Leonard. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you,
Aye.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.